When asked about how to play or run a horror game, the setting is much more important. The tone, even, is more important than the system you choose to play with. You can absolutely play a horror game of Pathfinder, of 5th edition. You can play a horror game of even sillier, lighter systems. But that is, of course, on the condition that you, as a player, agree to be frightened, as silly as that sounds. Imagine a horror game as if you were going to see a horror movie. No, not see a horror movie with friends, but sitting in your living room at night with all of the lights off and the curtains drawn, and you put on perhaps your favorite horror film. You do that to be afraid. There's a thrill to it. And it's very much like that in an RPG. Now, of course, you could play horror games like, say, Call of Cthulhu, and that is fine if you want your supernatural horror. But it's very, very possible, which is the point of this video, that games like Pathfinder and Dungeons & Dragons can be scary if you put a little effort into it. I had recently run a horror campaign. Unfortunately, we did experience a TPK, but it worked. I ran a one-shot for D20 Modern about a slasher hunting down the players. And it worked very well because everyone went into it agreeing to be frightened, agreeing to play into this. When designing a character for a horror game, it's important that you give them fears and flaws more so than you might normally. A coward, for instance, doesn't always fit the game if you're doing a standard dungeon crawl adventure, but it does in a horror game. And it's made even better if your character might appear insane. If you're playing a modern game, be it D20 Modern or World of Darkness or whatever, well, maybe World of Darkness isn't a great example because that is horror, but let's say you're playing D20 Modern. Or perhaps the Dresden Files, you're playing as mortals who have no idea what the supernatural is. A character that is afraid of werewolves, he'll be ridiculed for part of it. It'll help add to the tension until, of course, that monster does appear. And of course, it's important to draw upon your own experiences when role-playing in these things. You know more than anyone else what you're afraid of. And I'm not saying that your characters should have your exact phobias or flaws. No, that would be kind of boring, to be honest. But you know what it's like to be scared. You know what your fears are. You know how you, as a person and other people, would react to, say, hearing a strange sound in your house at night when you're supposed to be alone, seeing a flicker of movement out of the corner of your eye when walking down the street, perhaps. You know somewhere inside of you that it's probably nothing, but at the same time, you might become frightened. And truth, of course, is almost always stranger than fiction. And to finish up this video on horror, I thought I would share with you a couple of experiences that I had regarding role-playing games. I was playing a Vampire the Masquerade LARP in Chicago. It was well after midnight. We were having a blast. I didn't want to keep doing it anymore, though, because I had work in the morning. And so we were walking back to our cars. And believe it or not, on the ground, I found this. It's just a little leather-bound notebook. But inside of it, and I admit I did read it. It's interesting. It felt a little wrong, but it's interesting. And it starts out with all of these wonderful thoughts on calmness and control and, techniques to be a person who might need to calm down a little, meditation, deep breathing, writing. But as it gets towards the back, it progresses further and further into insanity. This journal that I found is the first-person account of a man gone mad. And while, of course, it probably is some somebody's project or whatnot, because that's the only reasonable conclusion I can come to. It's fun to think of what this could actually have been, and it's especially interesting considering the game that I was coming back from. Now, the other was for Christmas. I had gotten a copy of D20 Modern, which is one of my favorite games, and I opened it up, and out fell a photograph of a dead man, brutally murdered. Now, of course, it was probably somebody's prop for their game, but it's very graphic and detailed, and it disturbed me very much so for a full day that something like this would fall out of a book. And we can use those kinds of experiences with the strange, with the unlikely, to help guide us in how we might roleplay a frightened character. The last bit of advice I'm going to give you is take it beyond the mechanics. Let's say you're playing Pathfinder and your character becomes frightened. That's a condition that you can gain, is frightened. And it has a little mechanical downside to it. But it's a lot more interesting if, instead of trying to, say, swing your sword regardless, you're frightened, you're scared, you're backing up. Perhaps you switch to a ranged weapon or run away entirely. It's all up to you. And it's all in good fun. Remember that horror is only fun if everyone agrees to it, and it's only fun if everyone agrees to buy into it. Thank you very much.